You ready? Yes. Good, because I am. EQ. We've been talking about it all weekend. There's been some amazing input, some amazing ideas. I was saying over lunch, I've been so fast scribbling notes and walking away with so many fresh ideas and experts like you to draw upon. You know, I've learned something new, and I see Dr. Tess isn't here right now. I'm going to talk about EQ, but I've added a fourth one, adaptable intelligence. So we'll bring that into play today. I've often wondered how I got to where I am, because like Carmen, I grew up on a farm in Minnesota. And she beat me though. She learned how to drive a tractor before I did. I was 11 or 12, but I did start driving a car in our fields at the age of 13. And I realized there's a lot of experiences in that. But one of the first times I realized how people's behavior really impacted me when I was 24. Imagine being a 24-year-old working in a university setting and working for a very respected boss. Now, there was only one other person, his direct assistant. And he really valued what I had to offer, my youth, my ideas, my energy. But then I guess I did something he didn't like, and I got nothing but verbal vomit from him for about 20 minutes. And let me just ask you, do you know what verbal vomit sounds like, feels like? When somebody just dumps on you? And I realized that I had such an emotionally intense response to that experience. My boss, I'm supposed to respect and love him, or not love him per se, but trust him. And here he has just turned on me horribly. I just froze, and I left. And I went to the director and I said, I'm never going back. Fortunately, my department trusted me too, and they helped me find a new position. But my boss never quite understood how he showed up and how he impacted me. It left a mark. Unfortunately, one that I found myself emulating at the age of 30. I moved up quickly in our small boutique firm, and within 4 years I was asked to become a partner, and therefore the first manager of people in my life. Somebody said this yesterday, and I apologize, I don't remember who, but at 30, managing people, I sucked at it. I was not very nice, I was not very mindful, and I ended up showing up just like I'd been treated. And that really set me back, realizing the impact, the adverse impact I was having on people. And so I took that opportunity to really take a dive into who was I and what factors shaped and influenced my journey. And that took me into family dynamics, our traumas, our early childhood upbringing. Because, as I mentioned, for those of you here yesterday, I grew up in a family of 9 on that farm in Minnesota. Well, can I ask you, where am I? Can you see who I am in that picture? Some things about us never change, right? I still have that round face of that little girl on the far right. But the difference in this family, not only were there 9, how many people have a family of 9 in the room? Oh God, no, right? How about 5? That's a pretty big challenge. 3. Okay, how about just 1? Each of those circumstances presents a different dynamic of who we are and how we're impacted. So I'm going to take a moment. He offered me a glass of water before, and I turned it down because I had an intent for that bottle. I was hoping I wasn't going to drink it all because I know water's a shortage today. But what was unique about this family were a couple of things. My father and my grandfather were in business together. That was a whole other dynamic. How many people loved their grandfathers? That sweet, cuddly, older man. Well, we used to run as soon as my grandfather would drive into our yard. He was like the town ogre. He was a bully. He was not nice. It was amazing that we even had the reputation in the community. He was a good businessman, but he sure, I'll say it again, sucked in dealing with people. The 6 older kids were all teenagers at the same time. And I know, I'm not sure where Ricardo is, and he's got 4, pretty close. 6 kids in less than 10 years. And then my mom thought she was done. Guess who came along? Me! And that was a surprise and a shock to my mom because she wasn't supposed to have any more kids. She almost died with my next oldest sister. And then she had another. And even 3 years later, she had another. Let's just say postpartum depression started kicking in about this time. And so between the dynamics of owning a business between my father and my grandfather, and I saw the horrible interaction that people like that, who supposedly were family and loved each other, could dispel and influence others. And then we had the 3 little kids. I was the oldest. And so the dynamics of a large family, a family-owned business, the gap in ages, and each one of us experienced a different phase of our family life. Some of them lived very wealthy, some of us lived very poor. And so where do we go with that? Well, it was those family dynamics that made me so curious about how human beings showed up. What drove them? Here we're all family members, but we were also very different. And while I was fascinated with medicine and started in pre-med, I thought, I really want to deal with the brain. Pursued a degree in psychology, but things happened. Couldn't get my doctorate degree, so I settled for a marriage family license, therapy license. I never thought I'd be a therapist, but it served me well. But it wasn't until I became a mediator in my early 40s that really made the difference. Working with people in conflict and seeing the dynamics that go on between them. That was a study worthy of a PhD right there. But as things progressed and challenges happened, life happened, then I was driven to have more education and understanding people, and I finally went back to get my doctorate degree. And that was fascinating, going back 30-some years later and learning about the neuroscience behind the brain. When I first got to high school and said, they actually write books about how people get along, I was astounded by that. But 30 years later, we actually understand the science behind emotions and thinking, our bodily functions in ways we never understood before. So, where does this go? As a mediator, I was a mentor mediator for the Department of Navy for 20 years in the civilian world. And so I got to work with people from all walks of life and all kinds of jobs and all kinds of bases, particularly San Diego, North Island, where I lived. And so taking it into the business world, I had this fascination again with family-owned business. And that became my specialty. But it didn't stop there. As a mediator, I would be called in to work out other team conflict. And so when the stakes get high, what causes people to act so poorly? And we've put together a series of 12 cognitive distortions, how smart people show up dumb. Because there are distorted ways of thinking that we can learn about. And so what I don't get, and I had a very fortunate mentor in Dr. Dan Dana, and he always brought the business case of why organizations should engage in conflict resolution training and intervention. And as time went on and I continued to learn more about emotional intelligence, what we know, there's tons of studies, some were referenced this morning, that even though we know when organizations embrace the principles of EQ, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, hence the glasses behind me, we know businesses are more profitable. And yet people themselves oftentimes feel unprepared to deal with the challenges, the lack of communication, the lack of leadership, the lack of role modeling. And I bring to your point a couple of things. Why don't leaders get this? That it makes good sense, business sense, to engage in diversity, for example. To engage in these people skills that are so essential. But they don't. They make assumptions. And the problem with assumptions is not making them, it's when we act on them without clarity and supporting data. I'll give you a case example. This was actually a freebie presentation I'd given a few years ago in the eastern part of California, which is actually the lowest socioeconomic county in the entire state. But I had worked a lot out there for a water utility, and so I was very familiar with it. It reminded me of home. It was farming. I felt comfortable there. But out of that presentation, the CEO of a local credit union said, we've got to bring her in. She might be able to help us deal with some of our problems. And so we embarked on a relationship of where not only did we do some general team training around some key concepts, concerns that they had, but then it became evident that the managers were really focused on getting things done with little to no regard for the people involved. And the CEO was struggling with a 38% annual turnover rate. Where do you think his time and money were going? Constantly hiring, recruiting, training. And with the work that we did, working closely, listening to their concerns, their challenges, over a 2-year span, some of which included COVID, because they still had to operate, they still had to function. They reduced their turnover rate from 37 or 8% to 8% in 2 years. That made such a difference that, I mean, it was like, those are pretty good figures to have a 7 or 8% turnover rate. But they were able to instill a culture and a sense of presence in the community because of how management was changing the attitude towards working with employees and educating them and working hard to raise their income. That they actually were able to build on yet another credit union location. Talk about ecstatic. I still get calls from that CEO going, we're still at it, we're still doing what you said. So that's when we talk about changing the culture, changing the attitude. What can leaders do? And making the business case for it. And there's a way to cost out the cost of conflict in organizations. But most leaders don't care as long as you're producing. But I think as we can all probably experience, that production, that productivity doesn't last forever. So that gap between potential and readiness to engage is costing us dearly. And now we're seeing it not only in organizational health, productivity, financials, but also in individual mental health difficulties and attendance. Absenteeism is one of the biggest indicators that there's problems in this organization. And yet people ignore it. Well, they've got something going on. Well, that's a big red flag in my world, that employees are not happy and they're not engaged with the leadership at hand. This goes back to some McKinsey research, 2018, needs to be updated, but when we talk about what we've been hearing throughout the last couple of days, it's diversity not just in gender or ethnicity and so forth, it's also about diversity of thought. And so as we can see, we get greater productivity. Okay, all of a sudden that's not working. There we go. And there is a statistically significant correlation between diverse leadership, thought as well as representation of the communities we serve, and better financial performance. When we take it to the next level with ethnic diversity, at the C-suite level, again, representing the communities we serve, the people who are employed by us, we see even more productivity by 33%. And of course, when we look at raising females into the upper echelon of organizations, we also see another significant elevation of profitability. It makes good business sense. Why aren't leaders getting it? Well, we've learned a lot about leadership in the last few days. And part of it is that they are so focused on getting things done rather than the people involved. Sure, people will perform, but they may not be motivated to last. And that's where we do see high turnover rates, difficulties with retention, engagement, quality of work can even suffer. Believe me, I saw it all through my 20 years of mentoring mediators in resolving workplace conflicts. And oftentimes what we have found is that their supervisors, their leaders in turn, didn't know how to communicate. Not so great news. If they weren't performing as well, if there was an adverse impact from something else. In fact, I knew a number of leaders who would withhold information. We don't want to let them know until we know what's happening. What a state of fear and disbelief that creates. So let's talk a little bit about the science. As many of you have seen, I'm not walking very well. This is a recent condition, but it's given me cause to think about what a leader's going through, because it's been a total reset of my way of thinking about myself. And thank you, Porto, because this is my first time I've done public speaking in over 6 months, except on screen. So, thank you. But as you can see, I have to have my props and some assistance. So life is different now moving forward. But it created a lot of fear. And I realized that when I applied what I was going through in my leadership capacities, even though I don't have employees directly working for me, but I work with lots of organizations, that my fear was spilling over. And I wasn't performing as well. I didn't know what was going to happen. But I took action to find some things out. And experiencing the things I've been teaching all along, because I go back 30, maybe even more, years to those early days of being in leadership, I was thrown right back to when I was 24, to when I was 30. And I realized the fear I had and how much it was affecting my mental well-being. And I'm taking some new alternative steps to deal with my physical well-being. Hopefully it'll all work. Everyone pray for me, please. But when we talk about, that's why I said yesterday, I get so passionate about the neuroscience of what's going on in the brain. Because our emotions, our thoughts, are affected by what's happening in our body, and I include the brain in that. Because what we see, what we hear, starts impacting the receiver, starts impacting you before you even make sense of it, way up here. We activate the brainstem, sending signals into our body. That's where we might manifest stress, and other types of disorders. It shows up in us physically. It shows up in our brain. And when we are lacking self-awareness, self-management, as part of our emotional intelligence, we're not able to get past those moments of reactivity. And I know all of you have a lot of great techniques, and I've learned so much, and yet we hear a lot about the pause, right? And so the pause is huge. And I'm going to share with you my 3 steps for how we can make simple but effective changes in how we show up. Anybody familiar with Daniel Goleman? Considered the father, father of emotional intelligence? He coined the term amygdala hijack a number of years ago, probably 20, 25 years ago. And the amygdala is what generates the adrenaline. And as somebody mentioned yesterday, that's going for about 20 minutes. And if we're still stressed out, then what kicks in is cortisol. So cortisol is our stress hormone. And when we are getting flooded with cortisol, we're actually impeding the brain's physical properties for how the neuronal signals pass through to get from the activated part through the emotional part back up to the thinking part. And so this is where our first step in emotional intelligence is about that self-awareness. Oops, I'm triggered. And then the self-management. Your first line of defense, folks, and we already do it. Breathing. Deep breathing. A very structured process helps you make that pause. And like I like to say, creates the space to move forward with grace, where you actually make choices. Daniel Goleman, just a couple of years, said very publicly in a LinkedIn posting, I got it all wrong. It isn't the amygdala hijack. Because what continued science has shown us is that there are a lot of other brain parts, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and others that are in that core of our brain that are all part of processing emotion, sound, visual, memory, all of those things. And so he reframed it to be the emotional hijack. The amygdala is just part of that. And so by understanding some of that basic physiology, it helps us understand some simple techniques that we can do to help us self-manage in those moments. And that's where my 3D formula for emotional mastery comes into place. I not only have taught this for a long time based on my experience and training, helping redirect people. Oftentimes my clients say, when I'm in tough situations, I think, okay, Dr. G, you're on my shoulder. What would she do? Because that's where we learn perspective. And so small things can help us change this emotional reaction that goes on in our brain. Because we do have increased adrenaline, cortisol, and yet we can shift that by how we manage ourselves. So there are some common communication things that tend to affect us here, direct versus indirect communication, eye contact. Jeffrey just talked about that. The eyes tell you a lot. Pay attention. Also, for our personal space, we can get into not only cultural differences, but also our communication style differences. Some people need more distance, others don't. Silence and pauses. You've heard the phrase, beginning of movies, silence is golden. It's okay to have silence. That gives people time to process what's going on. But then also being mindful, too much silence can be a deal breaker. And then lastly, time orientation. I oftentimes have this conversation with my workplace groups. What does being on time mean to you? Because it's not just a cultural thing, it can be. However, it can also be an organizational cultural thing. I used to do a lot of work with a couple of federal government agencies throughout California, and they actually had it written into their contract clause that you could be up to 15 minutes late and not be docketed for it. Do you think we ever got a meeting or training and started on time? No, because everybody knew that they could be late. And so people would be rolling in. And I have another organization right now. Again, it's like they get to work at 8 o'clock, but they spend the first 20, 30 minutes fixing their breakfast, eating their breakfast, making their coffee, and they finally get down to work a half an hour later. And then they wonder, why are we so behind? So clarifying common definitions becomes really important. So when we don't demonstrate good EQ, we have a variety of factors going on. We've heard it already, trust erosion. We also have innovation shutdown. People stop being creative because their ideas get shut down quickly. Time fragmentation, jumping from place to place, changing priorities. And that's one of the issues that a new CEO of an organization has. They keep changing priorities on people. They don't know what to expect. We coming, we going, are we staying there? What? And then business impact. Again, let's go to the dollars. That's really easy to measure. And then what are the factors behind that? And so one reaction at any one of these chains can lead to that reactivity that will set the whole organization off. I mentioned this yesterday. The mood of the leader, the style of the leader, ripples throughout the organization. And so it has to start at top, or at least pretty high at top. And that's where we made such a change in the credit union, getting around. So if we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. Dr. Wayne Dyer. And so my alchemy method is this. You wonder, alchemy? Well, it's mixing these different components together to see where do you stand. And so that's where my glasses come into hand, is I have 4 glasses. So one might be self-awareness, the other self-management, other awareness, and then relationship management. But if I had a 5th one up here, I'd call it that adaptability management. Because yes, our ability not only to display resilience, but our ability to adapt to change becomes critical. And so real quickly, write down the word listen, L-I-S-T-E-N, and write down the word silent. What do you notice about those 2 words? The letters are the same. So to use your emotional intelligence, it's about listening not only to others, but also listening to yourself. And we heard Ulrika, I'm sorry. Yeah, talk about her burnout. She wasn't listening to her body. And I actually have a client I've been working with for over a year, total shutdown. So we need to be silent first, to listen to what's going on. And then we want to learn through power of open questions and causing that pause. So here's where what I call the 4x6. I know it was described earlier by a 4x4 box method, but the 4x6, breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, fill in the abdomen, and breathe out slowly, 1, 2, 3, 4, pause. Repeat that 4 times. It'll make a difference. And then imagine if you did that 6 times a day, that you're building in what I call a little internal mini massage. So that's a neurological circuit breaker. We can use our breathing. We just do it differently. And the 360-degree perspective tool is, again, if I had my finger up like this, I have my hand around this, every degree on this circle is a 360, right? So every degree represents a different perspective about my fingertip. And so rather than arguing about, you see it that way, I see it this way, I disagree, what can I learn from you instead? So there's actually another interpretation of AI, appreciative inquiry. Has anybody heard of that? Yes. Okay, I'm not surprised, Carmen. Yeah, and so this is where we ask powerful questions. And that's something I learned through my mentor, Dan Dana. Get behind what you see and dive deeper to underlying interests. Because that's what prevents disengagement, and that's what keeps collaboration going. So it's really about transforming confrontations and conflict into conversations and collaboration. That's where we get creativity, transforming the experience. And so we go from emotional hijack to leadership presence and influence. And so leading the age of I, well, I love AI. I mean, it's been great for the work I do. However, it cannot replace that human emotional intelligence that we have. And so we have artificial intelligence, we have adaptive intelligence, and now we have appreciative inquiry. All go together. And so it's about being courageously curious and curiously courageous. And so I want to ask you to scan this QR code really quickly, enter the Porto, because this is the start of a new line of keynote speeches that I'm starting to give as well. So your feedback would be very helpful to me, and you will actually get the handout that goes along with my next slide, because I give you 3 techniques that there's 3 simple techniques that you can take yourself or others through in order to make change in just 15 days. So that's my 15-day challenge to you, the 3 Bs, and then we also have Park It. And these are all available on my YouTube channel, so I encourage you to go there, and it's part of my 3D formula for mindset shift and emotional mastery. Because we want to change things emotionally, behaviorally, and spiritually. So every conflict represents an opportunity for growth, connection, and collaboration, which I call the 3 Cs: courage, curiosity, and compassion. Okay, I want to say thank you all for having me here today. I've met so many wonderful people, some great thoughts, some great ideas, and thank you for supporting me and being up here.
Thank you so much. Actually, there are so much things going on in our